people, families, women and children, all living on Main Street. I urge my colleagues to oppose this anti-people, wrong-headed, downright cruel cuts to low-income women, infants, children, and seniors all across our country. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. What purpose does the gentlelady from Maryland rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I've been listening all afternoon, and I've heard economic philosophy described as Keynesian, and I've heard talk of fiscal conservatism and regulation and rugged individualism. We even heard talk of LeBron James. But one thing is really true. We haven't heard anyone on the other side of the aisle talk about hunger. And even LeBron James is not hungry. So I want to talk about a really simple economic theory, and it's called hunger. It means when you wake up in the morning and you're a young child in this country and your parents can't afford to feed you, you're hungry. It's the demand of hunger when you're going to school and you can't think through the school day because you're hungry. It's about going home on the weekend after receiving a school lunch on a Friday but not eating through the entire weekend because you're hungry. And really, Mr. Speaker, that's the only economic theory we need to discuss this afternoon. So just before I came to the floor, earlier in the day, I had a physical. I had to go 10 hours without eating. I described myself as starving. But clearly, neither I nor any member of this House of Representatives knows what it's like to be really hungry today. And so before I came to the floor, I had my piece of chicken. And you know what? That was more than the Republicans are prepared to give America's women, infants, and children. And so I rise today in opposition to these extreme cuts to the Women, Infant, and Children program and the underlying bill. We know the program is essential to providing nutrition to our nation's most vulnerable children. Now, I don't need a study to know what it means to be hungry, but studies show that Women, Infant, and Children programs reap tremendous benefits to the participants. They lead to fewer premature births, fewer fetal and infant deaths, and result in better cognitive and physical health for children. That's the difference between eating a nutritious meal and being hungry. I also rise today in support of my colleague Len Woolsey's amendment to block GOP attempts to roll back our USDA nutrition standards for our children. Because not only are some of our children hungry, but we need to make sure that they're eating to a standard that allows them to learn in our classrooms. The WIC program is essential to ensuring our youngest Americans receive the nutrition they need. And the amendment, the underlying amendment, will ensure that children continue to receive nutritious foods throughout their school day. Now, when I first came to Congress, I worked with our then chairwoman and our friend Rosa DeLauro to secure after-school supper programs in my home state of Maryland for hungry children. We have fed millions of meals through this program. And so I know that in my state and all across the country, the Women, Infant, and Children program serves 140,000 women, infants, and children every month in the last year. The program serves 9.2 million low-income families across the country. And as our nation continues to recover from a recession, the benefits provided to these families are an essential safety net for our vulnerable populations. And according to Feeding America, there's a 50% increase in need amongst families, seniors, and children right now. This is a time when ensuring the economic security of the American people is critical, and we can't stand by the Republican pledge to cut essential safety net programs. It's no surprise to the American people that the Republican conference selected yet another vulnerable group to slash while continuing to support big oil companies, farm subsidies, huge tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires, instead of supporting women, infants, and children. In this 112th Congress, this new and bold Republican majority began with an attack on women. They proceeded to attack our seniors, to a plan to eradicate Medicare, and now they're committed to an attack on our neediest and the health of our neediest infants and children. It's actually really shameful. It's even hard to talk about because it's hard to believe that in America that even those who sit on the other side of the aisle are willing to take away nutrition programs for needy women, infants, and children, rather than take away the tax breaks for billionaires, take away the subsidies for oil companies while our gas prices rise. I think that those on the other side of the aisle should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. I know that some of my colleagues have quoted Bible passages. I don't know, maybe quote the Statue of Liberty. What's happening in this House is not American at all. It doesn't hold to the values that we hold to take care of our neediest, to take care of our poor. And I'll be gavelled down, but we need to support women, infants, and children and stop the slash and burn on the nation's neediest children.
Time of the gentlelady's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
And I rise in opposition to the underlying bill. People across this country have agreed that we have to reduce our deficit, but they also understand that we shouldn't do it in the backs of working and middle-class people who are already struggling to make ends meet. The Republican-sponsored agricultural appropriations bill, on the other hand, cuts all the wrong things at exactly the wrong time. Here are 5 reasons that I plan on voting against it. First, this bill will raise gas prices by cutting anti-speculation efforts. With speculation at an all-time high, American families are paying now more than 60 cents more per gallon at the pump than they should be. But instead of ramping up anti-speculation efforts, this bill cuts almost half the funding for the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the very agency charged with policing oil speculation. Second, this bill takes foods out of the mouths of low-income mothers, babies, and kids, cutting WIC for about 15,000 people just in New York State alone. The bill cuts food assistance for pregnant women, for infants and children, by $650 million, or 10%, denying food and health counseling for up to 475,000 low-income women, infants, and young children throughout America over the course of the next year if this bill passes. The bill also would cut food and for low-income seniors and cut the help for food banks. Third, this bill increases the risk of our food supply by cutting safety inspections. As many as 48 million Americans are sickened every year by contaminated food. That's why, with my support last year, we stepped up efforts to increase inspection of food manufacturing plants and imported foods. With new strains of lethal E. coli sickening hundreds throughout Europe, now is not the time to be getting the funding for food safety inspections, for cutting that funding. But this legislation would do just that, making it impossible to implement the new safety standards and guaranteeing millions more Americans will get sick from bad food. Fourth, this bill cuts anti-childhood obesity efforts. Childhood obesity has tripled in the past 30 years. It's an epidemic. Obesity costs our countries $147 billion a year in medical costs. And for the first time in American history, life expectancy for the next generation is going to be lower than for the current generation. But instead of boosting efforts to combat this problem, the Republican bill eliminates funding for the Healthy Food Financing Initiative, designed to combat childhood obesity by bringing healthy foods to underserved urban and rural communities. Finally, this bill raises the cost of prescription drugs. By severely cutting funding for the Food and Drug Administration, American consumers will get food and medical products that are less safe due to the erosion of essential oversight, and prescription drugs that are more expensive as a result of the agency's limited ability to approve less costly generics. Just for those 5 reasons, obviously, big reasons, this bill should not be passed. And while I oppose these cuts, I do support responsible ways in which we can reduce our deficit, such as cutting wasteful subsidies and giveaways for the oil industry, ending special tax earmarks for Wall Street bankers, and allowing Medicare to negotiate for bulk rate disruptions on prescription drugs for seniors in the context of Medicare. These reforms in and of themselves, just those few, would save hundreds of billions of dollars without harming working and middle-class Americans who are already struggling to get by. This agricultural appropriations bill accomplishes the goal of deficit reduction in the wrong way. Let's move forward with a plan that does it the right way. Thank you very much.
Gentleman yields back. What purpose, gentleman from New Jersey, rise?
Correct the last word, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's easy for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to forget that this bill deals with programs on which the most vulnerable in our society rely. My Republican colleagues are proposing about $650 million in cuts to the WIC program. This action would essentially kick 200,000 to 350,000 women, infants, and children off the rolls. Now, Republicans claim that getting our fiscal house in order requires shared sacrifice. However, they're only requiring the sacrifice of those that are most in need. In fact, the cost of funding this program for 1 year is less than the revenue that would be generated by ending the Bush tax cuts to millionaires for just 1 week. Now you tell me, is that considered shared sacrifice? If we want to talk about being fiscally responsible, then there's almost no better investment and choice we can make than the WIC program. For every dollar invested in WIC, $1.77 to $3.33 or 13 cents in health care costs are avoided in the first 60 days after an infant's birth. Doesn't this alone make fiscal sense? The WIC program is preventative. It's preventative in terms of public health nutrition. It's a mission-driven program that seeks to improve birth outcomes, improve the nutrition of women and children, and provide nutrition education and food packages tailored to meet the needs of low-income women and children. I can't think of anything that's more preventative in nature and ultimately saves money. WIC serves approximately 8.9 million low-income pregnant women, new moms, babies, and children under 5 who have been determined to be nutritionally at risk. Are these really the people that my Republican colleagues want to carry the burden and weight of shared sacrifice? The Republicans expect, what do they expect? I mean, do you honestly expect your constituents to find relief if they're not willing to provide even the most basic of services? You don't even want to provide basic services for people in need. Where are they going to get relief in this economic downturn that we face right now? If my Republican colleagues continue to pursue this kind of action, they're going to have hundreds of thousands of hungry and malnourished women and children on their consciences. And I really mean that, on your conscience. And that's not something that I'm willing to accept. I urge my colleagues to vote against this appropriations bill and give the necessary support to our nation's most vulnerable members. I yield back.
Jim yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Connecticut rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, number 38, amendment number 38.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. DeLauro of Connecticut, page 2, line 14. After the dollar amount, insert increased by $136,070,000, reduced by $136,070,000.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes on her amendment.
My amendment, offered with my colleagues, Representatives Capter, Boswell, Farr, Courtney, Larson, and Welch, would restore full funding per the President's request to the Commodity Futures Trade Commission. The CFTC's mission is to protect the American public from fraud, manipulation, abusive practices, and systemic risk related to derivatives, including speculation in the oil markets that drive up gas prices, and to foster open, competitive, and financially sound markets. Funding the CFTC at the President's request will put 159 more cops on the beat, provide the agency with the updated technology it needs to properly regulate the multi-trillion-dollar derivatives market in order to protect American consumers and curb excessive speculation by Wall Street banks and oil companies. The current version of the bill, by gouging the CFTC by as much as $136 million, makes clear that the majority is putting profiteering and special interests above the basic, common-sense priorities of the American people. 3 years ago, we suffered an economic meltdown.
brought on by greed, corruption, total lack of regulation in the Wall Street derivatives market. We're still dealing with the economic ramifications of that collapse today. Millions of jobs disappeared, millions of homes foreclosed on, millions of families are struggling every day to get by. If that were not burdensome enough, same families are paying excessive prices at the pump right now because of dangerous oil speculation. Goldman Sachs has found that unregulated speculation adds over $20 per barrel to the price of oil. Even Exxon's top executive recently conceded that the price of gas has been surging due to speculators, who now make up nearly 70% of the market. Because of all the bad behavior by Wall Street, we passed the Dodd-Frank financial reform bill in the Congress last year, which would reintroduce transparency, accountability in commodities markets, protect the public from future malfeasance. Among these reforms was the strengthening of the Commodity Future Trade Commission, their ability to regulate derivatives and to prevent speculation in oil. Yet, in this appropriations bill, the majority is now trying to starve the CFTC of the resources that it needs to do the job. The decision helps Wall Street firms, big oil companies. If it passes, Wall Street can continue the risky manipulation of derivatives that brought on the last collapse. Big oil can continue to enjoy inflated profits every year due to artificially swollen oil prices. The losers, American families, forced to pay more at the pump with this decision or worse. Eviscerating the CFTC here, the majority is setting up taxpayers to pay for yet another costly bailout of Wall Street. The choices made in this legislation are reckless and disturbing, more to do with ideology than basic economics, yet part of a pattern by this majority. Under their watch, gas prices have reached an average of around $4 a gallon across the country, up dramatically from $2.78 national average in 2010. And yet, they still rush to protect billions in oil company subsidies, even as they cut the budget of the agency we know that can do something about this speculation. CFTC has already made a difference. Earlier this year, they charged 5 oil speculators with manipulating the price of crude, netting them more than $50 million, even as oil prices climbed toward record highs of $147 a barrel in the summer of 2008. We need this type of accountability in our oil market to protect American families. We do not need is a Congress that puts the profit margins of Wall Street and oil speculators over the needs of American families and the American economy. We came here to represent the American people, not banks and oil companies. And that means giving the CFTC the resources that it needs to do its job properly. I urge my colleagues to put Main Street before Wall Street and to support this amendment. Yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose, gentleman from Georgia?
Mr. Chair, parliamentary inquiry.
General status inquiry.
I accept the amendment and was wondering if we could go ahead and call the question and move on.
The chair is proceeding under the 5-minute rule, and so.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman recognized for 5 minutes.
You know, it's interesting. I want to read this amendment because it would. I've heard some comments about this bill isn't serious or whatever. Well, look at this amendment. I don't think you could call it serious. It says on page 2, line 14, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $136 million, reduced by $136 million. The effect of this amendment is nothing. It's a legitimate vehicle on a parliamentary rule to discuss something, but if there is a problem with the CFTC not doing its job or being unable to do the job because of this, there should be an amendment that addresses that. This is not an amendment. This is just a discussion, but I will enter into the discussion. First of all, I want to quote Michael Dunn. He's a Democrat member of the Commission. Here's what he had to say as far as oil speculation goes. The CFTC staff has been unable to find any reliable economic analysis to support the contention that excessive speculation is affecting the markets we regulate. That's from the Democrat member of the CFTC. If I quoted a Republican member and they say the same thing, then the Democrats would be crying, no, no, no. But that was a quote of the Democrat member of the Commission. Now, why are the Democrats so interested in blaming high energy costs on the CFTC? It's because they have opposed our own development of energy domestically. We do not want to explore for oil in Alaska, but the President of the United States goes down to Brazil and apparently understands, or in his view believes, that they are maybe technologically superior to Americans, that they can drill for oil off the shore of Brazil and they can do a better job than the good people in Louisiana or Texas or Florida can. And so the President of the United States, a Democrat, goes down to Brazil and says, drill for oil here and we'll lend you the money and we want to be your best customer. Now, if we want to decrease the price of domestic energy, then we need to explore our own energy. Instead of this phony argument that somehow, and by the way, I'm not sure, but I think Goldman Sachs is a huge supporter of President Obama. In fact, I think they were his second largest contributor. Not 100% sure on that. I'm sure somebody over here might be might be very quick to correct me if I'm wrong, but I know this, that I've heard over and over again that somehow Goldman Sachs is the problem with this bill. I don't, wasn't listening to every single speech, but that's what was one of the themes that we kept hearing. But if we want to decrease the cost of energy in the United States of America, you need to increase the supply and the production of domestic energy. And get away from this, well, it's the CFTC's not getting enough money. And I want to say this, it's very important about this budget and this budget number, is the President of the United States, a Democrat, budget failed in the Senate, which is also run by the Democrats, by a vote of 97-0. Now, I keep hearing, not this bill, not here, not now. Well, where? The Ryan budget is the only budget that has passed either body. It has not passed the Senate, but the President's budget failed 97-0. So if the Democrats are concerned, then why aren't they working on a budget that is acceptable to them? We had a number of budget votes here. None of them passed. There was one vote, one budget proposal, the RSC, Republican Study Committee budget, that was Mr. Garrett's and Mr. Jordan's, and it failed because they felt the Ryan budget did not go far enough. But the Ryan budget did get a majority of votes. The President Obama budget did not. And what did the President and Harry Reid do when their budget failed? Nothing. They left. That was it. If they're concerned about funding for the CFTC and the USDA and the FDA, why aren't they working on a budget that's more acceptable? Isn't that what leadership is all about? So what we're having here now is, because we won't explore our own energy and we won't develop it, we're going to blame it on the CFTC funding level. I think that this amendment, although it does nothing, I think we should move on to more serious discussions, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose, gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
To strike the requisite number of words.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, having heard the subcommittee chairman's discussion of this bill, I now understand why he didn't want to have a discussion of this bill. He wanted simply to accept it, so he would not have had to say nothing. Since it was not accepted, he did say nothing. He just took 5 minutes to say it. I take it back. He did say one very important thing, and it defines this issue. He apparently believes that speculation in oil is no part of the reason that oil prices go high. And he quoted a Democrat. He found a Democrat. One of the 3 Democratic members of the Commission. The other 2, of course, vehemently disagree. And by the way, we did not say that this is something Goldman Sachs doesn't like. Goldman Sachs is on the gentleman's side. Goldman Sachs opposes regulation of derivatives. Goldman Sachs merely mentioned in an analyst report that they believe that $20 a barrel of the cost of oil comes from the speculation that they engage in. Maybe they were bragging. They certainly weren't objecting. And here's what speculation means. And by the way, in our legislation that the Republicans are trying to undo, and in what the CFTC is trying to do, people who use oil are not regulated. An airline trying to hedge against volatility in prices, they're left alone. Here's what we want to say. If you do not use oil, if you never go near a barrel of oil, In fact, if you're one of those people who never even goes near the gas pump because you got somebody to pump it for you, if you never touch a barrel of oil and never use it, please do not buy up through derivatives so that you put up only a little bit, large amounts, so you can keep it off the market and the price goes up. That's what we want to do. The CFTC, we think, should be able to say to people who don't use the commodity, please don't buy it up and hold it off the market so you can then sell it when the price goes up and make a profit. The gentleman from Georgia says speculation is not an issue. He says it's drilling. Mr. Chairman, I do not know a thoughtful person who thinks that complex issues like the price of a commodity have a single explanation, except the gentleman from Georgia. I wouldn't want to violate the rules by suggesting that I would exclude him from the ranks of the rational. But every other rational person says that things like the price are set by a number of factors. No, I do not think speculation is the major cause. Neither does Goldman Sachs, neither does Wilbur Ross, the great investor. They say it's perhaps 20%. So we're not saying we're going to cut the price in half. We are saying you could reduce it by 20%. And by the way, it's not just oil. We just had a debate about food. Well, frankly, the WIC program that they are cutting wouldn't cost so much if we were to also limit speculation in food prices. And here's what we are talking about. And apparently, maybe the gentleman from Georgia speaks for his party. I've heard no dissent. The apparently official Republican position is speculation is fine. Let's not interfere with speculation. If people who do not use the commodity, who don't use oil, who don't use the foodstuffs, if they want to buy it up and keep it off the market so they can then sell it when the price goes up, why else would they buy it? They're not collectors. This is not stamps. This is not a hobby. It's a way to make money. And how do they make money? By driving up the price of the commodity, by buying it and withholding it, and then selling it when they can make a profit. And what we want is for the CFTC to tell to people who don't use it, no, there are limits on what you can buy. And we believe that contributes to the price of oil, unlike the gentleman from Georgia who said, no, the price of oil has only to do with exploration and drilling. Well, no one, I think, really thinks that, maybe not even the gentleman from Georgia. And what they do is to say, no, the CFTC won't have that money. They, in fact, in their budget, will give the CFTC less money in the next fiscal year than they have this year. Now, we have given the CFTC new powers under the financial reform legislation, which they don't like, to cover swaps. By the way, it's not simply speculation that's at risk here. AIG helped plunge this country into an economic disaster by an absolutely irresponsible use of derivatives. And that's something, again, we would like the CFTC to be able to regulate. They were allowed to get in way over their heads. So what we have here is part of a 1-2 punch from the Republicans. They want to do it legislatively, and that'll come up later. But here they're telling the CFTC, you should get less money as we give you this complicated issue of derivatives than you had before. And by the way, they also have added a catch-22. If you read the current Republican arguments, they are very critical of the CFTC for not moving quickly enough. They aren't using the authority they got. So first you complain that they aren't doing enough. Then you reduce the money that they need. And by the way, these are complicated things. They need to be able to hire very smart people. They need to be able to hire important information technology. You cannot have dumb people regulating, and I will give credit to those people out there manipulating derivatives and speculating. They're very smart. They have state-of-the-art equipment. And you want to put the CFTC in shackles. It is an effort to make speculation free of any regulation with a consequent increase in food prices and energy prices, and I hope the bill is defeated.
Time, gentleman's expired. For what purpose, gentleman from California, rise? Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of this amendment. We are slowly rebounding from a financial crisis that crippled our economy and left millions of Americans out of work. Clearly, consumer protection is important now more than ever. The Commodities Future Trading Commission, known as the CFTC, is an independent agency that protects market users and the public from abusive practices related to derivatives. This includes helping regulate oil speculation and food price speculation. Now more than ever, we need a well-resourced CFTC, and as Mr. Frank pointed out, this is new legislation. The agency is growing by hiring people who are going to be regulators and expects by September 30th, of this year to have in place what we have given them money for last year, which is 720 full-time equivalent positions. They will help ensure that the public is protected from fraud, manipulation, and systematic risk. And they will make sure that Americans aren't paying exorbitant prices at the pump and grocery stores. And the CFTC can do just that. In the past 3 years, the CFTC has obtained over $1.3 billion in judgments for Americans who have been victimized by thousands of profit-hungry investors around the country. And yet now, in the fiscal year 2012, this bill, the Agricultural Appropriations Bill, slashes the budget of the CFTC by 44%. So the first time that we begin to regulate an industry, we are going to cut it back by 160 jobs. They will have to let go. Now remember, they're regulating an industry that is 7 times larger than all regulated industry and regulated markets today. 7 times bigger than all regulated markets. This job cut will dangerously undermine the CFTC's regulation of commodities and could contribute to rising oil and food prices, as Mr. Franks pointed out. This is blatant fiscal irresponsibility, because here's what these cuts mean. The CFTC can't put enough cops on the beat to prevent the big banks from making risky bets that could lead to another financial crisis. So the American taxpayer will foot the bill to bail out Wall Street all over again. This put the needs of Wall Street over the needs of Main Street. But you know what else it means? It means that Americans will be exposed to manipulation of oil and food prices at the very time when folks are scraping together pennies to pay for rent and cover groceries. Our job here in Congress is to be the best possible stewards of taxpayers' dollars. And this short-sighted cut will yield absolutely no return on investment. In fact, we could be lining ourselves up to lose big all over again. I urge my colleagues to support the DeLauro, Capter, Farr, Larson, Courtney, Welch, Boswell amendment to restore funding to the CFTC and to avoid this misguided attack on the American taxpayer. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose, gentleman from Iowa, rise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To strike the last word and
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Replies and extend my remarks. Well, thank you. I rise to support the fair and necessary funding for the Commodities Futures Trade Commission. The CFTC acts as Wall Street watchdog, overseeing American markets that directly impact our nation's workers, businesses, and families. Refusing to responsibly fund this commission puts our constituents in danger of higher gas prices, higher food prices, and greater likelihood that Wall Street will once again take advantage of them. While the derivatives market has grown by 400% over the last 10 years, and the U.S. government has failed to match that growth in regulators, and now the majority wants to take even more cops off Wall Street, as someone has said, putting the Little League champions up against the New York Yankees. With speculators making up 70% of market players and an industry that invests $25 billion in technology each year, the commission that regulates behavior on Wall Street cannot afford to be left behind. Our taxpayers cannot afford to pick up the bill again. To monitor and regulate this market and protect American taxpayers, last Congress we passed the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act, and I might add that was not a knee-jerk operation. We took months and months, many, many hearings, as you well know, working across the aisle together and to try to do something that would prevent a rehappening of what we were going through and still have the after effect of. As ranking member of the subcommittee that oversees the CFTC, I have heard from countless witnesses, including Chairman Gensler himself, that we must properly fund the CFTC to protect American consumers and market end users. They must have the tools and the resources to do their job. Adequately funding the CFTC would allow the Commission to increase staff to do the job that Congress directed them to do, which is to prevent another 2008 financial crisis. It would allow the Commission to keep pace with the growth of the market they are charged to regulate and invest $66 million in technology to improve oversight of electronic trading. Still, the majority is dead set on delaying and defunding the CFTC. This legislation returns the CFTC to their 2008 level funding, the same level of funding that led to the taxpayer bailout of Wall Street, and only allows half of what they need now to do the job correctly. Defunding and delaying this implementation of the majority's handout to Wall Street millionaires and billionaires who have already been caught red-handed gambling with the pension plans of middle-class Americans and speculating the cost of oil $20 a barrel beyond actual costs. This is why I support and have co-sponsored the amendment to increase CFTC funding to the fair level of $308 billion. To fund the CFTC at 2008 levels is an insult to the American taxpayers who were asked to foot the bill in 2008 as a result of Wall Street's reckless behavior. Our nation has seen the effects of the 2008 funding level and what happens when our market lacks proper oversight. We must protect our constituents from the vulnerable situation that led to a financial collapse, and we must fairly fund the CFTC. Thank you. I yield back.
For what purpose, gentleman from Nebraska rise?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'd like to yield time to the gentleman from Georgia.
I thank the gentleman from Nebraska. And I just want to say, I just find it incredible that I'm hearing people say that the fault of the Wall Street meltdown was because of the CFTC not doing its job. I cannot believe that the meltdown in the financial situation is now being attributed to the CFTC, and to avoid it, we have to put in more money for the CFTC. I voted against the Wall Street bailout. The President of the United States voted for it as a senator, and again as president wanted part 2 of it. So I'm not buying that the Wall Street bailout. You know, AIG was mentioned earlier. That was done by the Fed. The Bear Stearns bailout, that was done by the Fed. The bailout of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, that was done by the House Democrats. So I don't need to be sitting here listening to people preach to me about bailouts and the solution to lower gas prices is to fund a bureaucracy. And it's a group that has been averaging about 4 regulations a year. And now, between now and late summer, 34 regulations. And I understand that those in the big government circles of Washington love more regulations, more government growth. But to say to the taxpayers that funding CFTC at a higher, unprecedented level is going to avoid the need for bailouts is ridiculous. And again, Mr. Speaker, I'm somebody who has consistently voted against these bailouts and these stimulus programs. I don't believe that government is the answer. I think the market still has the answer. I did not support the Dodd-Frank bill. What this is a lot of it is just an overreach, more government telling people how to conduct their business. Do I think there's a role for CFTC? Certainly I do. And can CFTC be effective? Yes. But when their own Democrat member says, and I'll quote again, the CFTC staff, not his personal opinion, but the CFTC staff, which is over 700, has been unable to find any reliable economic analysis to support the contention that excessive speculation is affecting the markets we regulate. Now, that's not my opinion. That's what the Democrat Commission member says the CFTC staff has reported. And should we be concerned about speculation? Yes, we should. But I don't think it is fair for any member of Congress to go back home to the taxpayers and say, I'm going to bring down the price at the pump because I have put millions of dollars into a Washington bureaucracy, and they're really going to get tough on that Wall Street crowd now. If we want to bring down the price of energy in America, we have to increase our supply. And I don't know of any other way to do it. Supply goes up and the cost goes down. If we want to help the consumers at the pump, we have got to explore and develop our own domestic energy resources. And discussion about CFTC funding comes second, third, fourth, fifth tier to that. And so if the objective is to bring down the price of gas at the pump, let's don't pretend that increasing spending for the CFTC is going to achieve that. And I thank the gentleman from Nebraska.
Mr. Chairman, let me add as well, it's a little difficult for me to sit here quietly and listen to the pontificating about Wall Street bailouts. I didn't support the Wall Street bailout either. There are now 5 banks who control over 50% of the assets, deposited assets in this country. Those banks that were deemed too big to fail in reality are too big to succeed. And it's the Main Street Bank that's under constant competitive pressure from these large institutions that have been empowered by further consolidations by the action of this very body. So it's very difficult to sit here and take that. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Chairman yields back. What purpose, gentleman from Connecticut, rise? Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this amendment as someone who also voted against the Wall Street bailout. However, would take or certainly disagree with the conclusion that speculation is not a factor in the price of oil, and certainly the huge swing that we have seen just in the last 6 months in this country. And I would cite ExxonMobil as my validator in terms of that point. On May 14th in Forbes magazine, hardly a Democratic left-wing publication, there was a story regarding an interview with Rex Tillerson, the CEO of ExxonMobil, who stated that the real price with traditional supply and demand for oil and gas should be roughly between $60 and $70 a barrel, not $115 a barrel, which it was back in mid-May. And this is what the article said, that Mr. Tillerson stated that the reason it's above $100 a barrel is due to the oil majors using futures contracts to lock in current high prices and speculation that is being engaging by the high-frequency trading of quantitative hedge funds. Again, traditional supply and demand, according to ExxonMobil, suggests that the price of oil and gas should be roughly to $60 or $70. Well, how will the CFTC bring us back to a market that is actually connected to supply and demand forces as opposed to the market that we have today? Under Dodd-Frank, what the CFTC was given was the authority to impose position limits on non-commercial interests who have swamped into the commodities trading markets of this country since Congress foolishly deregulated the commodities markets back in 2000. Today, the number of non-commercial traders in the commodities markets is twice what it was in 2000, and using virtually no money down, because the margin limits are almost non-existent, they have basically hijacked this market so that real end users, the people who depend on futures trading to lock in positions, whether it's airlines or back home in Connecticut, whether it's oil delivery guys who are trying to figure out whether they can offer lock-in contracts for next winter, they have been basically driven from this market. In Connecticut today, you cannot get a lock-in contract for next winter because of the fact that these traders now have absolutely no confidence in whether or not this market will be in any rational place 6 months or 8 months from now. So the need for the CFTC to reimpose some reasonable, quote-unquote, appropriate limits, which is what the Dodd-Frank bill empowers them to do, is the reason why their staff needs to be put into place so that we can have a market that existed back in the 1990s, our parents' commodities trading market, which was a stable market, which was basically for the use of end users and not for people who were using high-frequency trading, which the CEO of ExxonMobil cited as the cause of the swing in prices that we're seeing. And let's be clear here, folks. Supporting this budget from the majority is not about being a deficit hawk. Secretary Ray Mabus from the Navy testified before the House Armed Services Committee that every $10 a barrel increase of oil costs the Navy, in terms of annual fuel costs, $300 million a year. If you look at what the CEO of ExxonMobil says, the Navy right now is overpaying easily on an annualized basis anywhere from $300 to $500 million a year, and that's just one branch of the military. The Air Force uses a greater amount of fossil fuels, of oil and gas, than the Navy does, so that if you are truly a deficit hawk, if you really want to make sure that the Pentagon, who is going to be going through some gut-wrenching decisions about whether or not to provide for the warfighter in this country and protect weapons platforms that we need to defend this country, then we need a high-functioning CFTC to make sure that the Pentagon, as well as the rest of the government at state and local level, are not overpaying for gas and oil, that taxpayer has a huge stake in making sure that this agency, the CFTC, has adequate funds to do its jobs, because the savings to not just consumers and small businesses, but the savings to the taxpayers will be in the billions and billions of dollars. It far exceeds any of the claimed savings that this budget seeks to obtain through the cuts, through the unbelievably short-sighted cuts to the CFTC in terms of being able to do its job. We should oppose this budget. We should support this amendment, which is on the floor of this House. Not only the small, no, I will not yield, not only small business and consumers, but the taxpayer needs us to act to make sure that we have a rational oil trading market that is tied to real traditional supply and demand, which the CEO of ExxonMobil has told us is overpriced today to at least $20 to $30 a barrel. And I yield back the time.
Time the gentleman has expired. For what purpose, gentleman from Georgia rise?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was listening to the previous speaker's arguments, and I'm glad to hear that he's concerned about the U.S. Navy's energy supplies, and I was going to ask him if he had been kind enough to yield to me whether he was in favor of us starting to develop our own energy resources here in the United States. We've got a tremendous amount of energy that our Creator has given us here in this country. Off the northern coast of Alaska, in the western United States, in the Gulf Coast, and certainly I would like to see the oil prices drop. And the best way to get those oil prices to come down to a reasonable level is for us to start developing our own energy resources here in this country. Certainly our oil and natural gas resources need to be developed, clean coal energy, alternative sources of energy, nuclear energy, all these other things. And I just hear all this pontification from my colleagues on the other side about the FTC and the oil speculators. The best way to make the oil speculators lose money, which they would do when they increase the prices of oil by speculating on future prices, is by producing more oil here in this country. We've got a tremendous amount of uncertainty with all the things that are going on in the Middle East today. And that causes speculators to think the price of oil is going up. Now, I'm not one who's here arguing for the speculators by any means. I believe in the marketplace. I believe that the marketplace, unencumbered by government regulations and taxes, is the best way to control quality, quantity, and cost of all goods and services, including oil. And the best way to do that is to lower the cost of oil here in this country, natural gas, and all of our energy supplies for the U.S. Navy as well as for the federal government and for everybody. To lower the cost of gasoline at the pump is for us to develop our own natural resources, our God-given resources that are plentiful in this country. But I have seen in now 3 Congresses that I've been here, my Democrat colleagues block every effort that we've made to develop our own resources. I'll never will forget in 2008, while we were coming during the August break and talking about the Republicans' all-of-the-above energy policy, that a Democratic staffer said that the Democrat Party's energy policy was drive a small car and wait for the wind. That's not an energy policy. We need to develop the God-given resources that we have here in this country to lower the cost of gas at the pumps, to lower the cost of heating oil, particularly for our elderly citizens and poor people across this nation that this winter are going to be suffering tremendously economically because of the high cost of oil. It's not the speculators and the FTC that's going to do that, drilling for oil and natural gas and developing our own natural resources here in this country is going to be the solution. And I just encourage my Democrat colleagues to join with me and others here on our side to let's develop these resources. Not let's just talk about the FTC, not just talking about the more regulations on the marketplace, because more regulation we put on the marketplace, the higher the cost goes. So let's get the regulatory burden off of the energy sector so that we can start developing our own God-given resources here in this country. So if the gentleman had been kind enough to yield, I would have asked him to congratulate him in being concerned about our U.S. Navy and how much extra they're paying for oil, for all the energy sources that our military has to spend. We've got to stop this outrageous spending that the federal government's been doing. And the way to do that is lower the cost of energy here. And that'll help everybody. I yield back.
Good job.
Chairman yields back. What purpose, gentlelady from Ohio, rise?
The last word, Mr. Speaker.
Mr.
Chairman.
Gentlelady's recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise to associate myself with the fine efforts of Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro and Ranking Member Sam Farr to point out the anemic funding that is contained in the base bill for the Commodity Futures Trading Corporation. The Republican bill reduces below the President's request by 44% the necessary funding for staff for the Commodity Futures Trading Corporation and provides significantly fewer resources for the agency to do the job America expects. Now, why is this important? The CFTC is supposed to regulate betting, B-E-T-T-I-N-G, because really what's going on is all the American people know is a very sophisticated type of gambling, that when the bettors lose, rather than absorbing their losses, they come to the American people. But they're very powerful. And they create new mechanisms. They create mechanisms, they don't call it betting, but they have a term, collateralized debt obligations. That gives it a kind of luster. And from that they might derive a credit default swap. But in the end, as the book by Joe Nocera, All the Devils Are Here, recounts, what we really have is a Wall Street and a Chicago's futures market that has run amok, where market manipulation, speculation, and outright fraud led our country into the worst economic recession since the Great Depression. Make no mistake about it, these folks are very powerful, and one of the most important trades involved in this very sophisticated gambling is oil. This particular chart shows the profits being made by the major oil companies and compares the profits in the first quarter of last year to this year. If you look at Exxon Mobil, over $10 billion more profits this year than last year, and the list goes on. Whether it's Conoco at $2 billion, whether it's BP at $7.2 billion, these folks are not hurting. President Obama said back in April that part of the oil problem and the gas price problem is speculation. He's absolutely right. Even Goldman Sachs, one of the big beneficiaries of the betting, admits that a huge portion of the increase in the gas price is due to betting. And of all people, the chief executive officer of Exxon admitted in testimony in the other body recently that $60 to $70 per barrel of oil, whether it's $60, $70, $80, $90, $100, is actually due to speculation. So even those involved in it are admitting they're crying for help, so let's give it to them. Let's give them the help they want and desperately need. This Commodity Futures Trading Corporation has been charged with shining a bright light into the dark recesses that Wall Street and the futures markets would love us to ignore. In fact, I think the currency markets actually got themselves exempted. So there's huge sections of trades that are going on in our world today that aren't even the subject, even if we were to have the staffing we need over the CFTC, that would not be affected by it. But I'd ask myself, could it perhaps be the intended consequence of this restrictive funding proposal at the CFTC to prevent robust regulation of this market? If we look at what happened with mortgage-backed securities and all of the derivatives that flowed from that, we know absolutely for certain that the lack of regulation is the reason for our demise. We must make sure that the CFTC is able to take on speculation in the markets. And there's no more non-transparent market than this one in oil. So when the American people go to the pump and they cuss, they ought to think about this little agency called the Commodity Futures Trading Corporation that back in 2000 tried to get the right to regulate derivatives, and they were denied that right by a vote right here in the Congress. And most members had no idea what they were voting on because it was included in an omnibus appropriation bill. Isn't that interesting? Legislating on an appropriation bill and nobody found it. Well, they must have a lot of power in order to do that. So if we look at a few years ago when these derivative markets were worth about $13 trillion, now nobody I represent, including myself, can even imagine $13 trillion. But that derivative market grew from the mid-90s to the present, where it was about $40 trillion, and we had 475 employees over at the CFTC trying to figure out what was going on in all these markets. Well, today that market is over $600 trillion in notional value, and 15 times more than before, and there's not sufficient staff in order to regulate these markets. It's pretty obvious where we need support in order to rein in the abusers. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my remaining time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
Move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I don't come to the floor very often anymore to debate. I've kind of changed my pattern. 18 years ago, 19 years ago, when I saw egregious things, I'd be right here in the heart of the debate, ranting and raving, some people would say. When my colleagues and sometimes my constituents now ask me, have you lost your passion? I tell them that there are some reasons that I don't come to the floor anymore. One is that I find that most of the time my colleagues on the opposite side are tone deaf. They're not really listening to what anybody is saying to them. They're off on some radical right undertaking, falling off the right edge of the earth, and they're not listening to anything I say. They don't share my values, and they don't really care about this debate that we had 3 hours of talking about women, infants, and children going hungry. They really don't much care about that, I say to my constituents. And third, they just make up stuff. You know, they have this, you know, if we repeat it enough, it's got to be true, and we'll convince the American people of about anything if we just keep saying it over and over again. Or they lie about it and they have convenient memories that forget that it was President Bush.
Gentleman will suspend. For what purpose, gentleman from Nebraska rise?
The gentleman has accused our side of the aisle of lying. Is that a cause for having his words taken down?
All members will suspend. Gentleman will take his seat. The clerk will report the words.
Well, they're going to take them down. Yes, sometimes you can ask the chair, and the chair will simply admonish the general house, but they will, yes, they will, or no, they will. They suspend it, so I didn't ask him to take it down. I asked him what they think he did, so it's tough to see. But we'll get him to it.
For what purpose, gentleman from North Carolina, seek recognition?
In the interest of time, some people have said that I call somebody a liar